Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to The Law. This is your legal light and health law. And today, we are very privileged to have the best to educate us on domestic violence. You have heard domestic violence over and again. But what exactly is it? Who can be said to be committing domestic violence? Is it only about spousal relationships, or it is more than that? Did you know that if you made your spouse constantly unhappy, you are committing domestic violence? Did you know that if you deprived your spouse, your house help, a family member, or some dependent of yours, rest, you are committing domestic violence? So, it definitely is more than physical abuse. Let's take a look at this small picture of how domestic violence has become on the rise in recent days. Some women have lost their lives. This lady had a story to tell us recently.
Oh, God. I've been married for less than 2 years. My husband is Steven Dumbo. They are quite affluent. His family is quite affluent. He did this to me. I have 2 kids with him. I don't have money for a lawyer. I'm from a very poor home. Please, I need a lawyer. I'm a product of Wesley Girls. I went to UCC and I went to Rect Academy. People from this institution, help me, please, Ghana, help me. Help me, I'm jobless. He didn't want me to work. He didn't want me to find any job. He wanted me to work with this family. Now I needed the salary was very small. I couldn't stay. Now see what he has done to me. Please, I need a lawyer. I want justice.
Oh,
Oh. God. I've been married for less than 2 years. My husband is Steven Dumbo. They are quite affluent. His family is quite affluent. He did this to me.
Every year, many women and girls in Ghana sadly become victims of domestic abuse. The recent spate of violence against women and girls is tragic. It also poses a significant setback to efforts to bridge the gap on equal opportunities for all. I appeal to all Ghanaians to join me in the fight against domestic abuse. I am Rebecca Kufuado, and I say no to domestic abuse.
Welcome back. So this is going to be a period of some really very pure education that will help all of us to improve our relationships and how we interact with one another. We know that domestic violence may be suffered by men, but truth is women are under siege when it comes to domestic violence. So today, forgive us if the focus has to do with women suffering the unthinkable, the unimaginable. I'm Samson Ladi Anyanini, and I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Angela Dwamena-Boagye, who is Executive Director, the ARC Foundation. That's a name that comes up anytime you mention advocacy on gender matters. Dr. Angela Dwamena-Boagye, thank you so very much for making the time to join us.
Samson.
Great. Also joining us, and still via Zoom, is Irene Aboche-Nyahe, Director, Legal Assistance Network, Ghana. Thank you very much, Irene, for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. And thank you so very much, Honorable Katrine Afeku, who is former Minister, Tourism, Arts and Culture, right here in the studio. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Samson.
Right. Before I start, I discovered that as we played the lady crying over her molestation, I looked at Mrs. Afeku's face, and I looked at Mrs. Aboche-Nyahe's face, and I could tell that you were very disturbed. Irene, start with you.
Let me start by saying that show appreciation for you for staying focused on domestic violence issue and constantly bringing it to the attention of the nation. We tend to ignore the fact that the family unit makes up the nation. And if we are all broken, abused, that we will not be able to have the strength, the wisdom, the psychological fitness to support to the development of the country. I felt so bad. I have watched this video several times, but as you played it, I shed a few tears. Just looking at the desperation and the vulnerability of the woman. She is not somebody that can not work and take care of herself. But because she's married and she wants to listen and respect the husband, she was asked not to work, which is not even allowed. It is part of the abuse to prevent a human being who happens to be a woman not to follow her dreams, work, and earn income. So her husband told her not to work, and she has been deprived financially. Now she's crying, I don't have anybody. I need a lawyer, because she hasn't got the money to go out there and get what she wants. So that's the first lesson on domestic violence. If you are asking your wife or your spouse not to work, and she is not doing that voluntarily, that, oh, okay, I don't want to work, but you are asking your wife or your spouse not to work, that is a domestic abuse.
Okay.
An economic abuse, to be specific.
All right. Thank you very much. So what was running through your head as I saw you the way you looked, and you also looked at Mrs. Aboche-Nyahe, and then you put your head down? What was going through your head?
Samson, first we have to thank you for championing this cause, and very good afternoon to your viewers. I was emotionally distraught, because typically we tend to associate domestic abuse, domestic violence with, excuse the language, women who are not literate. This is a graduate, and she's very literate, but she's economically disempowered. Mm-hmm. And you could feel the desperation in her call for help, and that really got me emotional.
I like your choice of words. Graduate, economically disempowered. Disempowered, like Irene said, because she wants to be obedient to the husband.
And I think a lot of it also stems from not getting a platform such as yours to go through the Domestic Violence Act, to go through the nitty-gritty. So as part of the activism and advocacy, people will actually get to know that it is not only physical abuse that constitutes physical domestic violence, but emotional and psychological abuse is even sometimes worse. She feels imprisoned. Yeah. And it's mostly psychological and economical.
Right. And it's very hard, rendering when she spoke about the efforts that she was even making to assist and the man's family didn't seem to even appreciate it. And thankfully, I think when this matter came up about 2 months ago, Irene and some people sought to seek help for her. So we understand that she's been getting some help. Now, Dr. Angela Jomnabwaji, we know that today we intend to focus on educating people about the Domestic Violence Act itself and the specifics beyond physical abuse, as in violent acts constituting domestic violence. But help us understand, what are the circumstances that make women who are professionals, who have the best of qualifications, sometimes even better than the man in a relationship, agree to shelve their dream?
Well, thank you, Samson. I'm happy we are discussing this today, but tell you the truth, it's very difficult for me to understand myself, but we have some idea about why that happens. First thing has to do with our cultural and religious values. There are a certain type of understanding when it comes to our cultural values with respect to especially marriage, and also some of our religious values or our religious teachings in the way in which they are interpreted, that makes women already seen as sort of inferior to men, as second-class citizens. And this is the truth of the matter. Everybody talks about the fact that we're in a man's world, and it's still largely true, okay? So you're expected to go into a relationship in a subordinate position, and that subordinate position attaches to your legal status, your social status, your identity, even your religious expression, beliefs, and all of that. So if you are taught that a woman is to submit to a man in marriage, but you are not taught to understand what it means for a man to actually become like one who sacrifices for his wife to become all that God made her to be, okay, you only hear one side of the story. Or if culturally you are told that, you know, obema obatu etia etrebema, you know, obade otonya dua onto etudru, things like that. You see it everywhere. You see it in the law. You see it in family law. You see it everywhere you go, in educational institutions and so on. So we bring that cultural baggage and the kinds of teachings which I believe have been done wrongly over the years, even by our religious institutions, particularly the church, okay, to come into marriage with that. And so you're expected to obey your master in a sense. And this is not just a Ghanaian thing. It's a worldwide problem, except that many other countries have gone far ahead in terms of reform of law and so on. Yes, if you remember Blackstone, he wrote something to the effect that when a man and woman get married, you know, they become one person, and that one person is the man. Some of these were in English law, okay? Things about the fact that you can beat your wife, but don't do it with something larger than your thumb. Don't do it with a stick larger than your thumb, so that it will inure to the benefit of her soul, and then you will also have your wife under control. These things were in jurisprudence, okay? And we've come a long way trying to unravel some of these things and to make people understand that women too are human beings, women too have needs, have rights, and society needs to pay attention to women's welfare. And it doesn't matter whether it is in the public space, like we are talking about women in political leadership and so on, or in the private space. The private space is almost always considered as somebody's domain, private domain. So the law was reluctant in going into the private space until the discussions around the private-public dichotomy began, particularly around issues of violence against women and so on. And now the law is able to get into people's domain because of the kinds of abuses that are going on there. So we've come a very long way.
All right.
All of these things are part of the reason why women would accept things like that.
Right. So I'm going to have us start on a certain note. And even as Catherine, got into this studio, there are certain things that are happening that she's very unhappy about, and for very good reason. Like people who are abused sexually, and the fact that they need a certain help, or even through what form of domestic abuse, and they need medical help. And she's reading the law that tells her that this is supposed to be free, and yet we are charging. And she's very angry about that. We'll get her to tell us some of those things. But Catherine is leading a group of media persons and others to help the IGP's engineered program Stop Domestic Abuse, which is supposed to be a campaign nationwide to assist the process, to get people to understand, to become aware, and to stop domestic abuse. So if a while ago you heard the First Lady speak, Catherine is behind that. We will come to her shortly. But let's begin with Angela again. So I just opened to the Domestic Violence Act 2007. And it begins by saying that domestic violence means engaging the following within the context of a previous or existing domestic relationship. Then it says specific acts, threats to commit, or acts likely to result in A, physical abuse, namely physical assault, or the use of physical force against another person, including the forcible confinement or detention of another person. And I realized that we didn't used to hear too much of this. And the deprivation of another person of access to adequate food, water, clothing, shelter, rest. When I get there, I pause. Rest, leisure. Or subjecting another person to torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Then I see there's a whole lot. Sexual abuse, economic abuse, emotional, verbal, psychological, harassment, among other things. What exactly is domestic abuse or violence in the eye of the law?
Well, sometimes when you read laws, and thankfully I know who drafted this, Mrs. Estella Pia, and she's an amazing drafter. She retired from the Attorney General's Department some years ago. And so she really packed in as much as possible, looking at the kinds of cases that constitute domestic violence. And Samson, we don't talk from if you talk theory or just read the law, people don't get to see the reality of what we are looking at. Because we are both practitioners, advocates, and lawyers, we're able to merge it together for you to see. So what you read, domestic violence is any act in the Criminal Code, the Criminal Offences Act, which constitutes threat or harm. And it's also all these acts that are specified here: physical, economic, sexual, psychological, verbal harassment. And the reason why it's put together is because domestic violence has several facets, several faces. And almost always you would find that you have 2 or 3 of these things happening together. So for example, let's take what you read about the physical abuse. I was involved in a case where a lawyer would actually beat his wife up, strip her almost naked, and push her out of the house. Okay? Now you push her out of the house, you are not only assaulting her, you are causing her emotional torture, okay, because you have stripped her. She's in the public space. Neighbors find her and have to give her some cloth to cover herself before they take her home, okay? And then she's not able to even rest, find leisure in her own home. I remember the day her mother called me from abroad and said, if you don't go and get my daughter out, she will die. Now, if I read all this to you, you won't really see it until I describe some of the cases that we see.
Yeah.
A case of a judge, okay, who locked his wife in a room and kept her there for days. It took the striking force in those days to get the woman out. And you know what? This judge would open the door a little bit and give the woman food in a plate. He would push it on the floor for her to eat. I know cases, COVID time, we had to rescue a woman who had been thrown out by her cohabiting partner, who had constantly been threatening to throw her out. She has a child with this person. And COVID came, lockdown, evening. It was, getting towards evening. He threw her out with all her things. And it was a nightmare to rescue this woman. Okay? So you see people who can't sleep because they are thinking about what has happened to them. They are getting flashbacks, hypervigilance because of what somebody else has done to them. I know of cases where somebody, and you see sexual abuse here, in a domestic relationship, wife has just had a cesarean session. She comes back home. This is several years ago, and he insists that I'll have sex with you, and the wound opens up. Okay, so sometimes you need to get to see, to really understand, and that's why you have all of these specified in the law. Even when you come to harassment, you go to the interpretation section, and it actually spells out harassment even further, just to tell you how wide, how big domestic violence is an issue in our country. But most important thing to understand is that Ghana's Domestic Violence Act is a very unique kind of act. It's, us, we know how to cross our T's and dot our I's very well when it comes to laws. It doesn't look at only spouses. It looks beyond spouses to anybody within the domestic relationship. And anytime you think of domestic relationship, think about romance. Somebody with whom you have had some kind of a romantic link with, your spouse, your boyfriend, somebody you've had a child with before, somebody with whom you have had a relationship, even if it's not sexual, it's that wide. Then think also about blood relationship, okay? So somebody with whom you share blood by family, your brother, your sister, your uncle, your cousins, and then think also about somebody with whom you are in a residence. So the person may not even be a blood relationship or in a romantic relationship with you, but once they share a common residence, like co-tenants in a house, landlord and tenant, security officer, house girl or domestic help, and another person in that home, our law is that wide so that it can catch as many of these abuses as possible.
Please hold on.
It's not just between husbands and wives.
Hold on for me.
Yes.
Guys, all of you watching and listening, did you hear that? When you hear domestic violence, you have always limited it to a man and wife. Now, Dr. Angela Jomnabwaji is stating what is in the law, and as she speaks about them, because she's just too familiar with this law, I am reading along with her as she speaks about them. And guess the number or the category of people that she's talking about. She's mentioning that it doesn't have to be a sexual relationship. That is what the law says. For as long as it is a cordial relationship. So it could be a courtship. Maybe that is romantic. That's what she referred to first. It could be married. It could be an unmarried situation. And it includes, as she mentioned, children, house helps, security, your co-tenants, and the elderly. So, but I don't understand. How does domestic relationship include my security or the house help or the co-tenant? How does that work?
You want me to continue with that?
Yes, please.
Yes, that's Ghana for you. I mean, seriously.
This is why.
When it comes to making laws, nobody beats us. And yes, so we're trying as much as possible to make domestic work. So what does domestic relationship mean? So that it will cover anybody within home, family, residence, relationship kind of ambit. So people will understand that you can't just go about abusing people.
The law says actual or perceived romantic relationship, intimate relationship, cordial relationship.
And the courts can do that, okay? So you don't have to be having sex with your boyfriend. You may have a boyfriend or a girlfriend with whom you are just friends, let's say. You're not even courting. But the courts can say that if one of them hits the other or abuses the other emotionally or so on, verbally and so on, that can constitute domestic violence.
Okay.
But this law is interesting. There are even more interesting innovations in it as you read.
All right. Just take a breather and let me go to Mrs. Abochinya here. So now, when you get into it, it is talking about economic abuse, emotional, verbal, psychological. Then it explains, it says, namely, any conduct that makes another person feel constantly unhappy, miserable, humiliated, ridiculed, afraid, jittery, or depressed, or to feel inadequate or worthless. This is domestic abuse that can get me into 2 years in prison. Ms. Abochinya.
Yes, of course. And Angela, as usual, will always bring it, real to you. Let me add something little to what she said. When you read Section 2.2, it expands it beyond those that she has outlined. In other words, there are relationships that are not very clear, or probably have not been envisaged at the time of the enactment, or might not look direct, as a domestic relationship. So the law is that the number of time you spend with the person can be used to determine whether the parties are in a domestic relationship. So, for example, you can have a co-worker that you spend about 8 hours, 6 hours, or a lot of time with. When there's an abuse, we can evoke the Domestic Violence Act and say that you spend a good number of time together, or maybe students and teachers. So the law is so dynamic that it can be expanded to cover a lot of areas that hitherto were not there. Right. So adding to the specifics as to emotional abuse, verbal abuse, psychological abuse, among others. When Angela was talking earlier on, you heard her that one act, it can start with the physical abuse. But when you take a critical look, you can see that all these forms of abuse are interconnecting, where the person that has been physically abused will become traumatized. So that physical abuse can even affect the person's psychological health. That not to say that there are situations where the person will not be physically abused, but the person can be put in a situation that she will be traumatized and be abused psychologically. For example, you have a husband that you love, you cook, he doesn't eat, he doesn't talk to you, you don't know what you have done, he hasn't touched you physically, but he's making you feel so uncomfortable, so unwanted, that you are psychologically traumatized. Or an example that a case I handled, the woman will sit there and the husband will sit by her and be calling another woman and be praising the woman and be saying all kinds of things that when the wife hears it, she will be so traumatized. That is also a form of psychological abuse. And then we talk about the verbal, whereby people think that it's common to call people kwasia, abuawe jimi, and that kind of thing. So anything that makes life unbearable or doesn't make the home peaceful for the other person to survive as a human being in dignity is an abuse.
So in plain language, the verbal abuse aspect you mentioned, if you are found to be insulting your spouse or someone you are in a domestic relationship with, verbal abuse is insult, isn't it? That is domestic abuse.
Sometimes when you listen to the some of the verbal abuses that are reported, you might think that maybe the law may say it's verbal abuse, but some are deliberately put across to make you feel less of a human being. And some of the situation is said that some of the people that are verbally abused in a particular way somehow tend to believe what the other partner keeps saying to them. That, oh, as for you, you are stupid, so I need to help you to be able to function well in life. And unfortunately, I had one woman actually came to me and said, oh, my husband said I have a little problem with my brain that may Jimmy. So most of the time, I try to look up to him to give me direction. So she was constantly told over the years that she is not fit, that she is stupid. And she, at a point, believed it and has decided to function below her capabilities and potential so that she will be able to fit in. So she has accepted the abuse in a way that has destroyed her as a human being. So sometimes it is not as simple as you hear that, oh, the person said abwa, but they will constantly let you tell you some of these things to the level that you have to believe it and demean yourself to survive in that relationship. So everything you have to ask your partner to be sure that you are doing the right thing.
Okay.
And that is not done by physical abuse. It is done through words that are told or mentioned to you on several occasions. And the little mistake that is seen is pointed to us. That's an example of what I was telling you the other day. That, you know, your thinking abilities are not proper.
Right.
And then this is a mistake that anybody can do. So as you are groomed, or I don't know whether I should use the word, yeah, that's the only word available. You are groomed to believe that you are less human than you actually are. And those are done through verbal communication over the years.
Right.
And you will not believe that you can achieve anything in life.
That's terrible. Right. So I'll return to Dr. Angela Johnobwaje to highlight a lot more on when the law says making the other person unhappy, and depriving the person of rest, leisure. If you can explain that a lot more with the other I want to about economic abuse, what exactly is involved here. But Honorable Afeku, what is it that drives you to, at this point in your experience, you know, to dedicate yourself to help to lead this campaign about the hashtag Stop Domestic Abuse?
Samson, it's good that the IGP has also called on you. Being a woman and also growing up in around young girls who have challenges with esteem, because these abuses actually tend to diminish your self-esteem in your own eyes and in society. So having the chance to be in Parliament, reading Domestic Violence Act, and also living the example of having confidence as a young woman, you can lead exemplary life to motivate others. So when the IGP called, I felt very much like a call to duty, and I've known Madame Abwaje with ARC Foundation and all the good things she's doing. So it was a call in the right direction. But most importantly, what really irks me is some of the clauses that we don't tend to express it, and I'll read one quickly. Behavior or conduct, this is clause 1D. Behavior or conduct that in a way undermines another person's privacy, integrity, or security, or detracts, or is likely to detract from another person's dignity and worth as a human being. And women, generally, we tend to suffer from these indignation. You are not good enough. You are not beautiful enough. When you're constantly berated with these words, you tend to believe it and walk with that identity. And it will surprise you the number of literate women being killed. Recently in Legon, you saw it. I mean, this is a woman, a middle-income family. They travel, and she's killed. it's because she's in an abusive relation and she knows nothing else, but she thinks it's right and proper to stay and continue. And we see a lot of these. So normally when people hear of domestic violence or abuse, we tend to think it's people of lower social strata. It is not. It's everyday people, your colleagues, but they suffer in silence.
I was shocked listening to Dr. Angela Jamnabwaji speak about lawyers, judges.
Yes. So this is a canker
on
that
earth
requires
you lock up your partner
in a room. This is false imprisonment and a judge who knows law. So this is an appropriate platform, the law, to go through some of the clauses so we are armed with these nuggets. But the one that really gets me is Article 8. See, now you have a young girl in a rural community. She's raped. Incest is one of these big issues that we don't even realize. She's raped. She runs to the police because it's a criminal offense. Okay. So the police are leading this crusade. You go to a police officer and the police, doing their job, receives your complaint under section 6.6 of the officer shall assist the victim to obtain medical treatment when necessary. Part of the law. So now this victim goes to a hospital.
Section 8.6 is what you just read of the Domestic Violence Act.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now you go to subclause 3, it says a victim of domestic violence who's assisted by the police to obtain medical treatment under section 1C is entitled to free medical treatment from the state.
It actually uses the word free.
Free, an entitlement. So it's a right. Now, you come from Dumpase, it's an imaginary town. You've been raped by an uncle. You run to the police takes you to a hospital, and you're asked to pay 500 Ghana. So you will go home and suffer in silence. And unfortunately, most of these young girls with infections, it leads to infertility, and then it becomes someone who could have been productive in society Ghana loses from the potential of that person. So there's a lot intricacies that we need to bring it out. It's like in our customs and in our tradition, we don't talk about these things. You see well-meaning people beaten with black eyes and they paint it up and they walk through town because it's an unspoken taboo. But with a platform such as yours and the IGP with Dovsu and all these prominent people, starting with the First Lady and other prominent members of society who have agreed to be a voice, I think we can join the ACT Foundation, we join Madame, and we all become advocates because there are more hidden truths than what we see. A young lady gets acid thrown on her face for 7 Ghana cedis. Her face is deformed for life for 7 Ghana cedis. A little girl, the recent one that's even more despicable, domestic relation, enjoys a domestic help, a babysitter. It's all in a domestic setting. She's killed a child. That's manslaughter. That's outright an abomination. But it's going on. And these are issues that are happening daily. But what really is scary, Samson, is the unreported cases. What you see is what's reported. So the IGP, when we had interactions with him, his main concern is the unreported cases. The ones that we don't hear about is even higher than what we hear. And Madam Owusua, the DOPSU director, was kind enough to give us some stats. In 2018 alone, we had reported 9,393 cases of domestic abuse. In 2019, 18,629. And in 2020, there was a dip, 16,586. These are the reported ones. And I can bet you the ones unreported could be more. Because you're in a rural setting, you go and report to your family that your spouse or someone in a relationship is abusing, and they will send you back.
Right.
That it's even an embarrassment on the family. So as a woman, and to be fair, men are also sometimes abused, but it's the percentage-wise, it's very low.
Right.
As a woman, you are almost told, stay in it, and then it gets catastrophic, you die.
And this aspect about the medical, bills that are supposed to be done for free. Actually, with Arena Bochinya here and a couple others, we did one program here dedicated to that subject under the Coalition for Survivors of Domestic Abuse. And I'm very sure she'll be very excited that there could be some collaboration. You are not in Parliament anymore, so you have time and you are dedicating. You can assist to ensure that the duty bearers will ensure the reality, because there's actually the Hospitals Act, which confirms that it is supposed to be free, because the report, medical report, is needed by a government agency, the police or the Attorney General, for them to be able to prosecute. And the law says this has to be free, and yet they are charging, and the charges is what is, you know, discouraging people.
It is. It's an inhibition. So you don't really get the prosecution, and then societal attitudes towards the victim is even worse. So now the vicious cycle, they go back, they get raped again, and then they just become silent. And we have a lot of young women suffering. That psychology of not being worth anything is even worse than the physical abuse. And I think you have a bigger platform to let people in Ghana realize that we are neighbors' keepers, we are brothers' keepers. But the IGP, in collaboration with a few stakeholders, that we have started this, we are not going to relent. I think if it happens to your neighbor, it could happen to you. And this is a dangerous phenomenon that is even growing. Every day you see something in the news of a woman killed, a young girl raped, and we're becoming jaded. It's like, oh, it is not normal. It cannot be normal.
Right. So what we are doing so far, you would discover, is to help you to identify clearly a situation of domestic abuse when it happens. Once you are able to identify it, then you are on the road or on course to get help when you seek it. So thank you so much for the education. Let's go back to Dr. Angela Jomna-Boaje, and I was asking you to, you know, explain further on the question of leisure when it is lacking, becomes, you know, abuse, making someone unhappy, you know, in a domestic relationship, and then the economic abuse. What exactly are these? And when you are done, Mrs. Irene Abochi-Nyahe, we have statistics that show that just in 1 year, last year, we have had as many as 110,000 or so girls, 16, some of them 14, yes, including 10-year-olds that have been impregnated. And the reports will show that most of them were impregnated not by boys, but adults. What is that? Yes. Yes, Dr. Angela Jomna-Boaje.
Yes, I missed you for a little bit, Samson, so I'm not sure what question it was.
Yes, so I was asking you to expatiate on what constitutes what the law refers to as economic abuse. It says economic abuse, namely the deprivation or threatened. When I read this, I step back. Deprivation or threatened. That means even when it has not yet happened. Or threatened deprivation of economic or financial resources which a person is entitled to by law, the disposition or threatened disposition of movable or immovable property in which another person has a material interest, and hiding or hindering the use of property or damaging or destroying property in which another person has a material interest. Combine that with making someone unhappy and depriving them of rest.
Very well, Samson. I'll come to that in just a minute, but I'm thankful for what Honorable Afiku and a few people are doing. Next time they meet the IGP, can they tell him that we asked that they elevate DOFSU to a directorate? There's no other police unit in Ghana that receives the number of cases that DOFSU receives, and yet they are not willing to make that a directorate so it can be more effective in doing its work. And secondly, the Minister of Gender needs to know that the Domestic Violence Secretariat needs a lot of help, because that's the secretariat that's coordinating all of these things. Otherwise, we go back to square one. So I just put that in so people understand that our duty bearers are also failing.
Very useful.
And we need to let them sit up. So economic abuse, I mean, yes, deprivation, threatened deprivation. We live in a society where we know that marriage is supposed to, especially marriage, bring some rights, you know, that are accrued to spouses. For example, spousal property rights. And actually, this particular section also brings to the fore the issue about spousal property rights, for example. So you have a property in which you have material interest, for example, and the person denies you an interest. You don't have access to it. You can't enjoy the proceeds from it. When they are disposing of it, they don't tell you. Material interest in it. Even if in half of it, so form abuse, and in Ghana, it is quite prevalent in Ghana. You would also find that when you are telling your spouse or your partner that they can't work, like the example we saw, okay, somebody who is able to economically produce, and yet it's not because they are, you know, they are unable to. One person just exercises power and control. I remember a young man telling me, I don't want my wife to work. And why don't you want her to work? Because somebody will give her a lift when she's coming home from work. And I'll hate it for the person to see her thighs, you know, things like that. It's in our heads. So this gentleman was just refusing that his wife should work. And it was based on his authority, not on anybody else's persuasion. Okay, so those kinds of deprivations, when you deprive people of the necessaries of life, water, food, shelter, and so on, and you will find that we have a similar provision in the Criminal Offences Act, and it's also in the Children's Act. You'd also find it comes there under maintenance provisions, for example. So that's one of the highest kinds of abuse in Ghana. Go to Department of Social Welfare, go to DOFSU, and it is rife. Neglect and just failing to provide the necessaries of life for your family that's dependent on you. That is it's a very big form of abuse in Ghana. And sometimes these things are actually also a type of psychological deprivation, okay? It's not that they don't have it. They probably have it, they are spending it on other things, but they will say they won't give it to you because that's a form of punishment. You may even be separated and the person knows that they have to take care of the family, but they say because you will, quote unquote, chop some of the money, they won't take care of the children. So all of these kinds of deprivations and economic abuse do exist in Ghana. Right. When it comes to the psychological parts, very quickly, you know, making somebody unhappy, constantly unhappy, jittery, and so on. Good enough that this law actually calls in, the courts can call in for psychological assessments. So a clinical psychologist may be asked to write a report because you have to actually prove. You can't just look at somebody's face to say they are constantly unhappy. So through the psychological assessment, somebody who is showing signs of being depressed, you know, jittery, constantly and showing signs of anxiety, this can be proved when a psychological assessment is done and it's brought to the court. Extremely thankful to you. And Ms. Abochi, I had asked the question earlier that the statistics, and this is statistics that is unmistakable, is so accurate. And yet, once again, this statistic is only what has been reported to the hospitals. As many as 110,000 young girls, 16, 14, 10-year-olds have been impregnated. The good number will drop out of school, and the good number have been impregnated by adults. Some are in a domestic relationship with them.
Yes, it's quite frightening. And if you also look at it, that those are the people that this generation will be handing over to, and they are not being developed mentally or to be given the right resources. Now,
Irene's line has frozen, unfortunately. So I was interested in finding out from you, Mr. Feku. This campaign, very laudable. So the police and the IGP's idea is that we need happy homes. We need homes that are where there is joy, and therefore it will limit crime, and so on and so forth. But how exactly are you going to go about this? This is such onerous.
It is, and the point he makes that makes him support this is there's a direct correlation in when a happy home is stable, crime is less, and also the police will have more hours to focus on other things. The number of calls they have to respond to domestic violence incidents in homes will be reduced, and they will be able to focus on other issues that is germane to their work. But this is the vision. He called a few people, including you, we're about 12, and he's asked us to start with the education. So the director of DOVSU, Madame Owusu Achireme, is one of the leading advocates, Madame Joyce Ayi, of course, our First Lady. And we have a few, we intend to reach out to be part of it, but we have started with your platform. And then we'll move to other stations, media partners that are part of it. The Despite Media has also started with it, and we'll do the Angel, Oman, and other networks that will come on board. But we need to emphasize that domestic violence is a criminal offense.
Right.
And people delineate. They think, oh, it's okay, I beat my wife, I'll go to the police station and then we'll resolve it at home. No, it's a criminal offense. And once that education and that link is made, people will also be cautious and be wide awake that we need to also have loving homes. When you love your partner, you will not abuse them. And that was the premise of the relationship to begin with. Secondly, the IGP is doing this as his social responsibility to help DOVSU, to help society to see this as a real menace. It is a challenge, and I'm happy to be on board with you, with other prominent stakeholders who are willing to sacrifice of their time to go out of our comfort zones to help people to understand that domestic violence is not part of our cultural values and we shouldn't entertain it.
Great. Irene, your line cuts, it got bad. So if you can take a minute or so to wrap up for us the very good education that you were giving us. We are going to do a series of this because we will need to do and let people know where to seek help, how to get the help. And as we started and introduced this, many people are asking, we have seen a poster, a flyer with all women. Can we hear what the men also think about this? So we will continue in that direction. Yes, Irene.
Yes, so this 110,000 girls that obviously are under the age of 16. In other words, they cannot consent to sex. So the pregnancy is evidence of defilement. Mm-hmm. How many of them are in prison? Or how many of them have been arraigned before the courts? So there's a huge gap between access to justice by ordinary Ghanaians. I wish that we could do a further studies as to what happened to this 110,000 Ghanaian children that we are supposed to train and hand over the country to. Mm. And she said, this is just those that have been reported. So obviously, all these children fall within the abuse that that the perpetrators have committed crime. Mm. Now, if these crimes are not being punished, I can trust that by next year we'll get to about 300,000 girls.
All right. So I'd like to say thank you so very much. Time just caught up with us. Honorable Catherine Afeku is former Minister, Tourism, Arts and Culture, and she's leading the #Stop Domestic Abuse campaign. Dr. Angela Jomnabwaje is Executive Director, the ARC Foundation. Irene Abochi Nyahe is Director, Legal Assistance Network, Ghana, and Executive Member, FIDA Ghana. I'm Samson Ladi Anyanini. Let's listen to the First Lady again, and then, God willing, next week we'll bring you another edition of this show. Now you know what domestic abuse looks like. When you identify it, seek help. We'll show you how to seek help.
and girls in Ghana sadly become victims of domestic abuse. The recent spate of violence against women and girls is tragic. It also poses a significant setback to efforts to bridge the gap on equal opportunities for all. I appeal to all Ghanaians to join me in the fight against domestic abuse. I am Rebecca Kufuado, and I say no to domestic abuse.